Okay, so hello and welcome everyone to this second Brian Trainor Memorial Lecture organised by the Ulster Historical Foundation. The first one took place in September 2019 here in PRONI, but the disruption caused by COVID and other pressures prevented the organisation of a subsequent commemorative event until now. My name is Rosana Trainor and I am Brian and Pilar Trainor's eldest child. It is a great pleasure for me to have been invited by Fintan and the team at the Foundation to MC this gathering of friends, family, contributors and audience members here in the room and remotely. I know there are many of you out there in the ether listening in. Welcome to you all. It is very satisfying that today's event is taking place in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland. This organisation was, in a way, Dad's alma mater. He had tried the academic world, as you will learn from William, but it was PRONI, under the enlightened direction of Kenneth Darwin, that gave Dad the opportunity to channel his tremendous energy, love of history and of making archives publicly available, his communication skills and ferocious driving technique, to name just a few attributes. Our first speaker this morning is Dr. William Roulston, the Ulster Historical Foundation's Research Director. William knew Dad well, having worked with him for 20 years at the Foundation. They also traveled together on lecture tours to North America, which is a good way to really get to know someone. William gave this paper last year at a local family history conference in Coleraine, where I heard it, together with my cousin Frankie. It was both educational and entertaining. So when Fintan contacted me to say that the Foundation was planning to organise a second Brian Trainor Memorial Lecture, I thought this was the perfect opportunity for William to reprise his talk. William's paper is entitled Dr. Brian Trainor, Ambassador for Archives. Thank you, William.
Good morning. And it is a real honour to be asked to speak on this very special occasion. I'm delighted that Pilar and Katrina and Rosana are here, and thank you all very much for coming as well. This short presentation will look at the life of a man whose impact has been felt far beyond this place and whose legacy will live on long past his own passing in 2018. I had the privilege of knowing and working alongside Dr. Brian Trainor for the last 21 years of his long life, and I counted him a valued friend. Many of you will be familiar with his name, and in this presentation I want to look at a number of activities in relation to the collection, preservation and promotion of archives, and thinking of archives in the broadest sense of not only the institutions but also the collections of records in those institutions. Now, given his role in helping others understand more about their genealogy, it is appropriate to begin with Dr. Trainor's own family background. He was born in Coleraine on the 26th of May, 1928, the younger of two sons of Bernard Trainor and Christina Kenny. He was baptised in St. Malachy's Church in the town on the 30th of May. The family home at that time was 19 Alford Place, now 38 Bushmills Road. Dr. Trainor's father, Bernard, was the chief clerk in the goods department of the LMS Railway at Coleraine. He was the secretary of the local branch of the Railway Clerks Association, and for a number of years in the early 1920s, he was an independent councillor on Coleraine Urban District Council. Bernard himself came from a railway family, for his own father, Philip Trainor, was station master at Macfin, just a few miles from Coleraine. Philip, in turn, was from Merholp, near Downpatrick. When speaking at a special event in 2017 to celebrate his life and work, Dr. Trainor emphasised that though he was from the religious minority in Coleraine, he grew up in what he said was a real community and felt deeply proud of being a native of Coleraine. Tragedy struck the family in the early summer of 1931 when Bernard Trainor died. Brian was only 3, and support from the local community and church was vitally important at this time. Scholarships enabled him and his older brother Frank to go to St. Columb's College in Derry. From there, Brian went on to Queen's University Belfast, from which he graduated with a first-class degree in history in 1949. He then spent 2 years at the Institute of Historical Research in London before returning to Belfast and taking up a lectureship at Queen's in modern history. He covered for J.C. Beckett in 1955 when Beckett was on sabbatical. In 1956, he applied for and was accepted as an assistant archivist in the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, then a comparatively small institution based in the law courts in Belfast. He believed that what secured him the job with PRONI was his answer to a question put to him during his job interview. He was asked, "What would you do if you were a dictator for a day?" His response was, "I would reintroduce the integrated national school system of 1931. During his early years in PRONI, Brian was occupied for long periods on fieldwork as he traversed Northern Ireland, searching out important collections of records. His longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Bill Crawford, himself a Coleraine man, recalled that Brian was known as the bulldozer. Such was the sheer volume of records that he brought into PRONI. He was all involved in giving talks, creating exhibitions, and in general promoting PRONI to wide audiences. I have here a newspaper clipping from the Strabane Weekly News, and it's from the 10th of November 1962, and refers to the fact that Dr. Trainor had actually been giving a series of lectures in Strabane on the history of the town, in fact in the town hall, the old town hall, referring to the muster roll of 1630, for example, the hearth money rolls, and so on. And you think of it, 1962, this is November 1962, the M1 had only just opened. It went only as far as Lisburn. The M2 was still to come. Going to Strabane from Belfast in 1962 was a long journey, but one he made repeatedly. Such was his commitment to broadening access to archives. Local historians will be well aware of the initiative through the Institute of Irish Studies at Queen's in the 1990s to publish the Ordnance Survey memoirs in 40 volumes. In fact, Dr. Trainor was something of a pioneer in this regard, because in 1969, he edited and provided an introductory essay for the memoir on the parish of Antrim. For many researchers from my part of the world, the Foyle Valley, Northwest Ulster, one of our deepest debts to Dr. Trainor is his work in transcribing the voluminous 18th century correspondence of the Abercorn estate, the letters between the 8th Earl of Abercorn and his agents. These letters were dictated by Brian in 1969 as part of his recuperation from a serious injury in Madrid when he was hit by a car that had mounted a pavement and knocked him unconscious. The letters, running to some 4,000 pages of typescript, can now be read on PRONI's online catalogue, and they provide a vivid insight into life on the Abercorn estate in the 18th century. In 1970, Dr. Trainor was appointed deputy keeper or director of PRONI. 2 years later, PRONI moved into a new purpose-built facility on Balmoral Avenue. The current head of public services, Stephen Scarf, in an article in Familia, noted Brian Trainor's directorship witnessed the repositioning of PRONI as a centre of excellence in the field of education. Among the initiatives was the seconding of teachers to PRONI and the production of resource packs containing facsimiles of original documents. This was something of a golden era in PRONI's history, with a number of hugely talented and highly respected members of staff. I've mentioned Bill Crawford already, and also Dr. Anthony Malcolmson, respectively the acknowledged authorities on the linen industry in Ulster in the 18th and early 19th centuries, and Anthony Malcolmson, the acknowledged authority on the aristocracy and landed gentry in Ireland. Younger staff members at that time, he'd be pleased to hear him described as that, younger staff members included Trevor Parkhill, another Coleraine man. What is it about Coleraine? Whose particular interests included emigration, about which we'll be hearing very soon. Dr. Trainor's support for academics and their research was considerable, and many wrote appreciatively of his assistance in the acknowledgements to their books. One observer called PRONI the third university in Northern Ireland. Professor Peter Roebuck, a former provost of the Coleraine campus of Ulster University, described Brian's leadership as, to quote him, somewhat unorthodox, but thoroughly enlightened. In recognition of what he had achieved, Dr. Trainor was awarded 2 honorary doctorates, in 1984 by the University of Ulster, and in 1986 by the National University of Ireland. In an obituary in the 2023 issue of Dúichí Níl, the Journal of the O'Neill Country Historical Society, Brendan McAnallen recalled the time that Dr. Trainor gave a series of talks in Benburb, down at the Priory in Benburb, on documents in PRONI of local relevance. Dr. Trainor encouraged Brendan to come to PRONI and to see more of these items for himself. A few days later, Brendan turned up at PRONI and he happened to see Dr. Trainor, who personally gave him a tour of the search room and showed him how the cataloguing and ordering system worked. Dr. Trainor retired from PRONI in 1987, and from then on devoted most of his energies to the Ulster Historical Foundation, with which he had first become directly involved in 1974 when it was still part of the Public Record Office. He served as director and then as research director of the foundation until 2006. He continued to undertake extensive lecture tours of North America in the company of myself, Fintan Mullen, our executive director, until 2013, when he had reached the age of 85. And these were grueling tours, I can tell you that. It was not glamorous at all. It was driving hundreds of miles in a day, staying in cheap motels, spending all day talking, which was a great pleasure, of course. I do remember the last trip, the very last day, we were speaking at, this is a wonderfully named place, we were speaking at the Flowery Branch Library of the Hall County Library System in near Atlanta in Georgia. And afterwards, one of the delegates took us sailing on Lake Lanier in Georgia, which was really quite remarkable because I don't think either of us had ever sailed on a boat in our lives before that, but we made it back alive, thankfully. Now, even after he ceased doing the lecture tours, Brian continued to provide research assistance, particularly during our annual conferences, when his expertise in PRONI and in the National Archives in Dublin was deeply appreciated by the delegates. The final occasion, in fact, in which he joined the foundation, the foundation's conference delegates for the Research Day in Dublin, was in 2016, when he was in his 89th year. The lecture tours were themselves major undertakings by Dr. Trainor. He had previously been involved in international conferences, and in 1980 had delivered a keynote lecture at the World Conference on Records at Salt Lake City. In 1985, he was part of a UK delegation to the State Archive in China, and a year later undertook an extensive lecture tour of Australia and New Zealand. From 1989 onwards, annual lecture tours to North America were undertaken. To begin with, he conducted these alone, often traveling between destinations by Greyhound bus. In all, he undertook nearly 40 tours of North America, speaking in 44 US states and most Canadian provinces. These tours provided opportunities for interested audiences to learn more about archives in Ireland and the collections and how they could find out more about researching their ancestors. Many of those in attendance went on to visit Ireland in search of their roots. One attendee at a presentation in Boulder, Colorado, in October 1989, afterwards wrote, "For 8 hours, I listened to Dr. Brian Trainor. And though I sometimes had to translate his accent into my accent to comprehend, he made my Irish ancestry come alive." His other major commitments in the world of archives was Brian's involvement with the Irish Manuscripts Commission. This body had been established in 1928 by the government of what was then the Irish Free State, with the purpose of publishing important historical documents relating to the history of this island. Joining the IMC in 1971, Brian was temporary chair of the commission for a short period in 1976 to 7. And in 1987, the Taoiseach, Dr. Gareth Fitzgerald, appointed him chair, and he went on to serve 2 5-year terms. During his chairmanship, the IMC published several editions of its journal Analecta Bernica, edited by Dr. Trainor, as well as 17 editions and reprints of primary source materials. Among the most significant achievements during his time as chair was the publication in 3 volumes of the Drennan MacTeer Letters, 1776 to 1819, edited by Jean Agnew and based on documents here in PRONI. It was the first output of the Women's History Project. In its tribute to him, the IMC stated, "Brian had a passion for archives and for making records available, and he worked tirelessly towards that end." In 1975, Dr. Trainor was appointed a governor of the Linnenhall Library in Belfast. This was at a time that the library was facing considerable pressures and its future looked increasingly bleak. A review had concluded the Irish collection should be loaned to Queen's University and the library building should be leased to the Belfast Education and Library Board. On the 18th of December 1980, the governors met to ratify these proposals. Now, Dr. Trainor had missed the previous meeting because he was out of the country with work. Now, however, at this meeting on the 18th of December, he expressed his vehement opposition to the plans and insisted that the library had a viable future if it took the necessary steps. As John Killen wrote in his history of the Linnenhall Library, to quote John, "In a remarkable deathbed conversion, other governors expressed themselves in the same vein, and within the space of 5 minutes, the policy which had taken 2 years to formulate was overturned and rejected." John continued, "This was undoubtedly the most important decision that any committee or board of governors had to make in the history of the Linnenhall Library." Dr. Trainor was asked to prepare a memo of his own proposals, the future of the library, which focused on the need to explore all possible sources of revenue. A major and successful fundraising initiative followed, and the future of the library was secured, as it is today. Dr. Trainor had long realized the importance of graveyards as sources, not only of information on family history, but also providing insights into broader history, social, cultural, migration, to name a few. I remember a happy hour spent with him in the old cemetery in Savannah, Georgia, in February 2007. And noting that of all the different ethnicities buried there, it was the Irish who were most inclined to add a place of origin to their headstones. Closer to home, one particular cemetery with which Dr. Trainor had a strong association was Friars Bush on the Stranmillis Road. By the late 1970s, it had fallen into a state of dilapidation. In 1978, Brian organised a conference at Magee College titled The Conservation of Historic Graveyards. Following the Magee conference, Dr. Trainor worked tirelessly to find a way of restoring Friars Bush, involving other similar-minded individuals, such as Dr. Eamon Phoenix and Professor Richard Clark, and opening his home for meetings. Eventually, a scheme to restore this ancient burial ground was developed and implemented using young people from a youth training scheme. Despite warnings by experts that 17-year-olds were, to say, quote, the least productive workers and likely to cause interminable problems, the Friars Bush Reclamation Project was underway by November 1982 and completed 2 years later. A local newspaper headline summed it up brilliantly: "Jungle reverts to graveyard." Today, Friars Bush remains one of Belfast's most important heritage sites. And while we're here today thinking about 40 years of Familia, just in the last couple of weeks, I happened to find in one of Dr. Trainor's boxes in my office, believe it or not, his own copy of the original Familia file. And you wouldn't believe the sort of things that are contained in this. Apparently, the original Familia was launched at the Linden Library on the 20th of December, 1985. And believe it or not, on the following Monday on Good Morning Ulster, there was a short feature about the launch of Familia. So it's great to uncover an important piece of archaeological evidence about the history of this journal, and you'll be hearing more about that presently. Dr. Brian Trainor passed away at his home in Belfast on the 22nd of August 2018. As was his wish, his remains were brought to his home place for burial in Coleraine Cemetery. The tributes to him were many. In an obituary for the Journal of the Archives and Records Association, Stephen Scarf called him an indefatigable archivist and a scholar of phenomenal output and boundless enthusiasm. In Analecta Hibernica, Dr. Raymond Refuse of the RCB Library called him a human dynamo and a dedicated and enthusiastic advocate for the worlds of archives and family history. In short, Brian Trainor was the greatest ambassador for archives that this country has ever produced. And at the personal level, may I say he was one of the most fair-minded and generous people I have ever known. Thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you so much, William, for that illuminating and affectionate portrait of Dad's start in life and overview of his career. Lovely. This year marks the 40th anniversary of the publication of the first issue of the Foundation's journal, Familia, Ulster Genealogical Review, which Dad did so much to help conceive and launch in 1985. From 1978, when the Ulster Genealogical and Historical Guild was created, Guild members initially received two very useful but quite utilitarian-looking publications: Subscribers List and Newsletter. Under Dad's drive for continually improving and adding value to services offered and benefits to members specifically, he turned to who else but his old mentor, Ken Darwin, and his young acolyte, Trevor, to create the more professional publication in terms of both content and looks, which we know today simply as Familia. Ken was an inspiration to Dad, or Trainor as he sometimes called him, and he was a familiar figure to us children as we were growing up. We used to visit him and his sister, Eve, at their home on the Belmont Road. In fact, as a child, my sister Katrina used to call him my Darwin, my Darwin. Under these two editors, but especially Trevor, at 40, Familia has an impressive run of volumes and published authors. It has garnered a reputation at home and overseas as one of the top drawer historical and genealogical journals published on this island that appeals to and serves both amateur and professional historians alike. Our keynote speaker this morning is another person who knew Dad well, the aforementioned Trevor Parkhill. Like Dad, Trevor hails from Coleraine, as they all do, and like Dad, he spent many years at PRONI before moving on to become the Keeper of History at Ulster Museum. Trevor also worked in Dublin at the Irish Manuscripts Commission, an organisation that Dad chaired twice in his time, so some nice synergy there. As well as being an early contributor to Familia, Trevor became only the second person to edit the review, taking on the role in 1994, and he continues this work today. Trevor's keynote lecture to us is entitled Emigrants' Letters as a Source for Irish Historians and Genealogists.
I was very pleased, honoured even, to have been asked to deliver this brief reconsideration of the many values that we've already heard about before and virtues that Brian Trainor showed in the field of Irish archives and sources for historical and genealogical research over his long and distinguished career. Brian had a formative influence on my own professional development. If I may quote Tom Jones, I was just finished my finals at Queen's in 1972 and took the train back home to Coleraine. And as I stepped down from the train, there to greet me was Brian Trainor. Now, the context is I had formerly been interviewed for a job that I didn't get in PRONI, and Brian was not on the interview panel, but he had been told of my sort of reasonably impressive performance. It was a job, if you remember, Valerie Adams got, my esteemed colleague. Brian then took me aside, placed his, I'd never met this man, placed his arm on my shoulder and said, look, old boy, I can't tell you I haven't got the job, but I would advise you to apply to the Irish Manuscripts Commission for the Business Record Survey job. So in Dublin. So that was my clear recollection of meeting for the first time and him taking me literally, as it were, under his wing. The resourceful and redoubtable Brian Trainor. I equally recall vividly then going to Dublin 2 weeks or 3 weeks later to be interviewed by at the Marion Square headquarters of the IMC. The panel was, Brian by this time I think had gone on holiday and was not on the panel. The panel was chaired by the sort of the redoubtable Professor Robin Dudley Edwards, a huge man with a great leonine head and a shock of brilliant white hair. So he welcomed me by saying, well, Mr. Parkhill, Mr. Trainor thinks you're the man for the job. We shall see. So I passed what had clearly become by then a test of character and got the job. The IMC Business Record Survey had been established 2 years earlier in 1970, the joint initiative of Brian himself and Professor Louis Cullen of Trinity College, Dublin. And Cullen, who shared Brian's remorseless search for historical sources that would, among much else, begin to restore what had been widely regarded then as the irretrievable damage done by the Four Courts fire half a century earlier in June 1922. And if I may be allowed an aside, I was sent to my Coleraine GP by the IMC for a medical certificate. And when my GP found that I was to be based in the Public Record Office in the Four Courts, he became very animated. He recalled as a young boy in Howth, North Dublin, hearing a loud bang, a large mushroom in the sky, and then 20 minutes later was chasing charred, smouldering medieval documents, the aftermath of the explosion in his garden in Howth. Of course, when I got to Dublin, the one thing I couldn't mention and couldn't even be heard of was the fire. There was a sort of a collective denial, which in a sense pinpointed the need for just going out there as Brian had been doing and was appointing the commissioner, the surveyors, to go out and get some records in. Brian had by then begun amassing a range of strenuous fieldwork campaign that was to become PRONI's many strengths. The plethora of business and solicitors' records that had just been transferred to the new premises that were mentioned in Balmoral Avenue. But it is one of the other genre of records, emigrants' letters, with which Brian was closely associated, that I want to take a closer look at here today. In association with Professor Rodney Green, Brian had accumulated several and what would turn out to be important collections of letters received in Ireland by family members who had previously emigrated, principally to the United States and to Canada, but also to Australia and to a lesser extent New Zealand, and all of which were deposited in PRONI, either in original or in copy form. Many of these formed the basis of Rodney Green's seminal essay in Essays in Scotch-Irish History, published in 1969 by what was then the Ulster Scott Historical Society in the Ulster Scott Historical Series, published significantly and impressively by Rutledge and Keegan Paul, and edited by Rodney Green. Simply entitled Ulster Emigrants' Letters, Green avowed that he had been collecting emigrants' letters since 1960 and had acknowledged what he estimated to be some 380 emigrant letters then held in PRONI. Kirby Miller spent some time in the late 1970s in the QUB Institute of Irish Studies, and although its director, Rodney Green, died in 1981, Rodney's influence is evident in Miller's 1985 publication, Emigrants and Exiles. Looking back now, 40 years on, Emigrants and Exiles can be seen with hindsight to have established the study of migration from the island of Ireland on an entirely different plane. It is perhaps worth noting that David Noel Doyle's earlier Mercier Press publication in 1983, Ireland, Irishmen and Revolutionary America, had provided a timely rejoinder to the only other main publication at that time was the Northern-focused emigration story chartered by R.J. Dixon in the Ulster Historical Series, Ulster Emigration to Colonial America. Kirby Miller's book provided a much more continuous narrative of the migratory movement from Ireland from the early years of the 18th century, and in doing so provided a context for the swelling 19th century migration stream, estimated by David Fitzpatrick, no less, to have been something in the region of 8 million people from 1800 to the early 1920s. Much of the initial research of Miller's seminal book was carried out in PRONI when Brian Trainor, in a manner of speaking, took Kirby under his wing. I was something of a witness to this. Ever enthusiastic, Brian's approach could sometimes border on the, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, slightly tactless. As such as when he landed Kirby in my office one day in the search room and said, "Here, Kirby's going to be staying with you." And looking back now, I'm taking into account the outstanding and trailblazing work that Kirby undertook. I now regret I wasn't as welcoming to this intruder as perhaps I might have been. But it was part of Brian's visionary nature that he saw the potential in opening up public access to the wide-ranging collection of emigrants' letters in PRONI, and which featured so convincingly in the narrative excuse me, that Miller eventually produced in 1985. One of the most illuminating issues to arise from Miller's 85 publication is the convincing rationale that builds up, illustrating the extent of emigration in the pre-famine period. Only W.F. Adams, published in 1932, Ireland and Irish Emigration to the New World, estimated or had attempted to reconstruct the popularly held belief that Irish emigration had somehow, mysteriously even, begun with the famine. Adams' estimate, and it can only be that, is that in the pre-famine generation, 1815 to 1845, between 800,000 and 1 million people had emigrated from Ireland to the United States and Canada. And it has been until now generally unchallenged. Of particular note is Miller's account of pre-famine emigration and the extent to which it is amplified by the use of evidence from migrants in letters back to Ireland. Many of these letters he located in PRONI, but he also compiled his own and very extensive collection, which he subsequently has now deposited in the National University in Galway. The principal role these letters had, as Miller makes clear, is the extent to which they informed and fueled the stream of migration that witnessed increasingly significant numbers from the early 1830s onwards. Miller himself states, quotes, "After 1815, New Emigrants' letters enhanced the New World's already glowing reputation and convinced increasing numbers of Irishmen that, quote, independence could be best achieved in what one Ulsterman, James Ritchie, writing in September 1826 from Kentucky to his parents in Moyrusk, parish of Macragall, County Antrim, called, quotes, the land of freedom and no oppression. It's perhaps worth noting that the Ritchie family, whose letters were published in the Mirror publication, actually were part of Rodney Green's collection, and they're noted in the Emigrants and Exiles as the notation ERRG. That's Rodney Green's collection. McBride, writing from Kentucky, where he advised, quotes, a fellow that will put his hand to anything can get work 7 days in a week and can earn $1 every day he sees. Miller's extensive narrative is peppered with an astute selection of quotations from the letters he collected and which he located throughout Ireland in the course of his research. A striking feature to emerge from a study of Emigrants' letters in PRONI is the extent to which they created something of a chain effect. Not only did the example of the first family member to leave and write home serve as something of a role model, the letters home were often accompanied by advice on how fellow family members might follow suit. In some instances, as was the case with the Smith family from Moycraig near Ballymoney, quotes, money from America was sent back not only to the family, but to the shipping agent in the port of Derry that he himself had used on his way out and was now arranging for a family member's migration to Philadelphia. William Smith, for 'twas he, having already settled in Philadelphia, wrote to his nephew Robert in Moycraig in March 1837, quotes, you wish to come to this country and say that your mother thinks you too young. But if you want to come, you are old enough. The sooner the better. You are not coming to strangers. You will come to the best home you ever had. And if you are coming, I wish you to sail in the first vessel that will sail from Londonderry, belonging to James Corscaden, as I have paid your passage and sent you some £2 pocket money, which James Corscaden will pay you on presenting this letter to him. By the mid-19th century, the system of immigrants sending money back to assist passages, particularly to Philadelphia, had reached a new level of sophistication. William Smith had paid the shipping agent in the port of Derry, in this case, James Corscaden. Robert's brother, Jonathan, eventually joined him in Philadelphia. There are two interesting features arising from the Smith family collection that I've been quoting from. One is the extent to which there is clearly an urban village in Philadelphia of other immigrants from the area of Ballymoney. There is a succession of references in the Smith letters home to others who have settled in the vicinity of Philadelphia and who would be known not only to the Smith family, but to the others in the locale of Moycraig. There's already a strong sense by the 1830s and 1840s of immigrants moving from rural Ulster to cities such as Philadelphia, and recreating much of what Herbert Gans, in his 1982 study of the Italian immigrant community in Boston in the middle of the 19th century, termed an urban village. The prospect that an intending migrant could find themselves in an environment that was familiar and not entirely unfriendly, and might even provide initial employment, must have been a factor in fueling the increasing pre-famine emigration stream from Ulster. Robert lists in his letters home from Philadelphia, quotes, let Daniel Crawford know that his son is well. Also Thomas Heatley that his son and daughter is well. And John Stewart and John Anderson is well and living in the country. John Brown is well and living with the McAfferin family in the country. And all the McKinney boys is well. James McCain is well and living next door to us. He and Samuel Woodside has a bottling establishment. Hugh Boyle as well. All good Antrim names too. The cataloguing of the names, beg your pardon. The cataloguing of the names of people, fellow immigrants would be known, is a not uncommon feature in other collections of letters from migrants. There's even a sense that the letter would be read not only by the family in question, but shared somehow in the neighborhood. Something that could only foster in local people a curiosity at the least about the prospect of their own migration and adding to the chain of migration that became evident in the letters. I've estimated that in the Smith collection, there are at least 50 individuals cited somewhere in the letters, conveying usually news of their well-being and progress. In the context of Familia and the Ulster Historical Foundation's raison d'etre, genealogical searching, it is worth pointing out the value of these letters, particularly in the pre-registration period, for providing not only names, but fairly specific, down to the parish level even, townland possibly, location in Ireland, and equally valuable, no doubt, specific locations in Philadelphia, often down to the street name, with occasional references to the business activity in which the immigrants were engaged. Rodney Green, in his Ulster Immigrant Letters article in Essays in Scotch-Irish History, draws attention to what he called reverse immigrant letters. These are letters written in Ulster and sent to family members who have already migrated to the New World and which have somehow been preserved by the family among the letters received from America. One of the values of these reverse immigrant letters is that they often intimate more clearly than is apparent in letters sent home something of the circumstances that prompted family members to migrate in the first place. This applies to letters in both the 18th and 19th centuries. James Johnson, for example, writing from Lochbrickland, County Down, to his brother Moses, who had emigrated during the linen slump of the early 1770s and was living in Leacock Township, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, when he received this information from James in a letter dated 16th of April, 1790. James describes events that betoken the sectarian nature of the radical activities that would lead to the rebellion of 1798. He says, "We have had a great deal of disturbances here in this neighbourhood of late. For 2 years past, a set of idle, indisposed young fellows assembled in the night and went under the name of break-a-day boys. They said their design was to take the arms from the Roman Catholics. The Catholics endeavoured to defend themselves and fought under the names of defenders. On the 1st of July last, a party of the Protestants, or break-a-day boys, assembled to celebrate the memory of the Battle of the Boyne, as you know, fought on the 1st of July. And with arms in their hands and colours flying, marched through this town. There were so many wounded and some few Catholics killed. And I doubt if things does not take a speedy turn that there will be some very troublesome times in Ireland before long." In a letter 10 years later, 1800, to his brother Moses again, who by this time had moved to Northumberland County, Pennsylvania, Henry Johnson narrates something of the turmoil the intervening decade has witnessed. He tartly begins by saying, "Dear William," "Dear William, since I have not heard," he says tartly, "since I have not heard from you for some years, I concluded you were either killed or had left the country. My dear wife departed this life December 1795. Since that time, there is nothing left here but disturbances, confusion, and in many places rebellion. Thousands have been killed, some in battle, and many by the sword of the law. And yet there are many trying which must be surely transported." Johnson signs off by commenting approvingly on his brother's decision to emigrate. Quotes, "I have reason to hope from what I hear from America and what I see here that you left in good time." I selected this instance from the Johnson letters from several, not least because it features in an important publication which is based on the reproduction and analysis of a wide range of immigrant letters called Irish Immigrants in the Land of Canaan, edited by, yes, Kirby Miller, David Doyle, Bruce Bowling, and Arnold Schreier, and published in 2003 by Oxford University Press, and many taken from the collection of letters Kirby amassed over the years. It is also interesting to note that one of the three people to whom the volume is dedicated is himself Rodney Green. Testimony yet again to Rodney's formative influence in the use of emigrants' letters and in shaping Miller's own interest. One of the many distinctive characteristics of this compendium of migrants' letters is the exact transcription evident in the text of the letters printed, including spelling and grammar and the widespread use of biblical metaphors, reminding us that much of the literacy evident in their correspondence, particularly in the period before the national schools were established from the early 1830s, had been acquired in church or from a reading of the Bible, more often than not in a family context. If I may bail out another aside, I was pleased to have been invited to launch the book in Dublin in 2003. Kirby Miller himself couldn't come, so David Doyle was to be there to receive the book. So I went there to a place just behind Trinity, and we milled around for an hour, and David hadn't appeared. So what else could you do? I said my piece, presented myself with a book, and went home. And then the next day I got a plenty message from David, a lovely fella, now dead, unfortunately, but sort of unworldly, to say that he'd gone into Dublin, but he couldn't find the place. So he got on the bus and came home. The Johnson letters represent the reverse emigrant letters of the 18th century. This theme continued in the 19th. Robert Smith's migration to Philadelphia, described earlier, itself had come about after his sponsor, Uncle William, had received a letter dated 1836, written to him from Moycraig by his own brother James, Robert's father, and which narrates something of the difficulties faced by the tenant farmers in the generation between the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the onset of the famine. Briefly put, Irish agriculture had had a very good war during the Napoleonic War, a prosperity that fueled a meteoric population growth. And when the bottom, as it were, fell out of the market and the domestic linen industry failed also, which had, in many cases had provided a second income for farming families, this began to be challenged by the proto-industrialization, and emigration had reared its head again in significant numbers. Dear William said, writing from Moycraig to his brother in Philadelphia, I met with great loss since I came to this place, which renders me unable to do anything for my family. In summer, my horse died, and I have not yet got another. This has been the severest winter, he's writing in 1836, ever I experienced in my life. Our summer was almost like winter, and our harvest in November. And this, the 4th day of December, a great deal of grain in the fields, and likewise a poor crop of potatoes, which has the appearance of a hard summer in Ireland. This is even before the famine. William, if you could be so kind as to answer Robert's passage, for he would come to you. On receipt of this plea from his brother, you will recall, William arranged for Robert's passage to be paid, sending the money via the shipping agent in Corksgaden in Londonderry. The other principal agent in Derry was, of course, J&J Cook, whose passenger lists in PRONI for over 160 immigrant ships sailing from the port throughout the 1840s and well into the 1850s, serves as a valuable genealogical source, and also reinforces Derry's role in the migration process for those departing from Ulster right throughout the 19th century. Henry Keenan's letter from Ballyscullion in South County Antrim to his brother Daniel, whose address is given as, quotes, the corner of Bank Street and Charles Street, Baltimore, Maryland, throws some light on the conditions imposed even on the relatively well-established tenant farmers during the Great Famine, which had been first seen, as you know, in the autumn of 1845. I have 7 sons at the fireside with me yet, said Henry plaintively. Times indeed are becoming worse every day. There is no appearance of the potatoes recovering. I wish you to inform me in your next letter what trades I am to put my boys to in order to go or send them to that country, America. It is very difficult to hold land here at any price. If I could get anything for my land, I would yet go myself and take my family. Don Atkinson's observation in his entry in the Oxford Companion to Irish History in 1998 says that uniquely among European nations, Irish women were as large a part of the emigration stream as were the Irish men. It's curiously, and this observation is not reflected in the collections of emigrant letters, almost extensively written by men. The vast majority are penned by emigrant sons writing back to their families. It is only indeed with the recent work of Leanne McCormick and Elaine Farrell, exemplified in the outstanding Bad Bridget, that the role of women has been given the attention it deserves. Collections of immigrants' letters in the hands of women immigrants are, as the Irish booksellers used to say, excessively rare. A recent antidote to this pattern will appear in the forthcoming issue of Familia. Spoiler alert here. The Rogan sisters emigrated from Killough, County Down, to Cincinnati from the early 1850s, and the letters they sent back from then until, quite remarkably, the early 1900s have been catalogued by Finbar McCormick, and whose treatment will feature in Familia this year. Kate and Nanny were the daughters of William and Mary Rogan, reasonably well-to-do corn merchant, I beg your pardon, living in Killaloch, the seaside village in County Down. It went into economic decline, and by the late 1840s, the Rogan family business was failing, and members of the family began to emigrate to America. The experiences of the family are recorded in the letters written from that time. Kate and Nanny sent back to Killaloch as they carved out their new lives for themselves in their adopted country. The first to emigrate in 1849 had been Johnny, who ended up in San Francisco. His brother Willie followed a year later, settling in Cincinnati, Ohio. As no letters from the brothers survive, we know little of their early experiences in America. In July 1852, Nanny announced that she too was to emigrate and join Willie in Cincinnati. Quotes, Willie and Johnny are both well, she notes in her first letter back, which encourages my mother and family to part with us. Indeed, nothing but feeling it my duty to go could induce me to leave them. Her sister Kate, working as a governess in Enniskerry, County Wicklow, came to stay with her in Belfast for a fortnight before she set sail for America via Liverpool. The parting was painful, with Nanny remarking of Kate that, quotes, the poor thing left me very sad indeed. Now, a week after arriving in Cincinnati, Nanny married her fiancé, John Cinnamon of Portadown, although it's not clear if they had travelled together or if he, very possibly, had travelled at an earlier stage and set up home for her. It's not until the following April that we hear again from Nanny when she reports that, quotes, my husband John has prospered beyond our expectations since I came. He had opened a store on the river's edge, the River Ohio, in Cincinnati, and the house they lived in was 2 miles away from the store. Willie, Nanny's brother, resided with them, along with an uncle of John. The household was completed by, quotes, a German servant girl and, quotes, a boy from Portadown, employed for putting out the merchandise at the store. Nanny worried about the family she left behind, and in May 1854, just 2 years after her own departure, her parents, Mary and William, along with her sister Kate, left Belfast to join the family in Cincinnati. Sister Kate's life in America, however, was initially not to be as so easy and comfortable as her sister Nanny's had been. Arriving in the middle of the summer, the Cincinnati heat came as a surprise to the new immigrants. Kate complained that, quote, I have felt quite debilitated with the heat of the climate and was threatened with fever. I would soon gain strength if I would get a rest at night, which I find impossible from the mosquitoes and the excessive heat. Kate initially moved in with Nanny and her husband. Cincinnati in the 1850s, with a population of over 115,000, was the 6th largest city in the United States. However, Kitty didn't quite make out as well as her sister. She writes, quotes, I often regret having come to America, as I had such good interest in Dublin and was well established also. My being Irish, she observes, is much against my success as a teacher here. There is a deeply rooted prejudice against the Irish. There is not the shadow even of me getting married. America is like the old country in regard to marriage. Girls who earn their own livelihood, she says, are shunned, and like many others in the world, those who would take me, I would not have. There you go. Picky, eh? When the position, she eventually acquired a position outside Cincinnati and Pequot, but when it ended, Kate despondently noted that she would have to try to give music lessons when she got back to the city of Cincinnati. If this failed, she would go to Kentucky or Virginia. Quote, I like the manners of the people, and as I must teach, I may as well make it as light as I can. At best it is irksome, and I am nearly tired of it, but there is no sign for it that I can see. But, and then she reflects, in spite of her own downcast mood, I have been more successful than most persons, a modest observation that can be applied to most immigrants who wrote home. Although it has to be acknowledged that those who fall into that category of writing home might be regarded as coming from the better equipped migrants, and reminds us to be wary just how representative the letters can be seen to be. Letters to and from immigrants to Australia are understandably less common. David Fitzpatrick, in his magisterial book, Oceans of Consolation, uncovered a choice letter, which, apart from its bathos, serves as an example of the lyricism that often is evident in immigrants' letters. William Fife of Drumcullion, in the parish of Macra Cross in County Fermanagh, wrote to his offspring, to whom he had bidden farewell at Derry Port in January 1860, as they left for Australia via Liverpool. My dear children, Nixon and Fahy, he said, you may think this strange of your father. I thought I could have stopped in Foyle Street until the boat would have gone away. But when I saw her going, I hurried down close to the side of the water, thinking I might have caught sight of Fahy's black bonnet or your jacket, as I would have known either. But I could see neither, though I looked with more desire, he said, than the watchman looketh for the morning. I then came to the side of the wall where I bid yous farewell, and I stood until I could not discern the Liverpool boat from the Glasgow one. The cry of my heart, he says, of that moment was, farewell, farewell, my children, though not one tear could I drop. I often wish I could forget the moment I took my last look at yous both, but it is not so. Recollection is ever at hand with me, and when I think again, am I never to see either of yous in this life? That is what wounds my heart. Now, in the context of emigration to Australia, one of Brian Trainor's UHF initiatives was the publication of Letters from Irish Australia, 1825 to 1929, in which Patrick O'Farrell looked principally at the experience of settlers and particularly the attractions that the acquisition of land offered in that far-flung colony, Australia. James Marks wrote on the 20th of February 1871 to his cousin, we are living on the farm, which is a good one, free of rent or taxes of any kind. I can grow the very best potatoes and vegetables I ever saw without manure. We don't regret leaving old Ireland, for this is a very good country for steady, industrious people. End of quote. The other attraction, especially for young men of Australia at that time, was, of course, the lure of the goldfields. George MacLean, writing in 1870 to William Williamson of Ahori in Rich Hills, outlined his views. Gold digging is both dangerous and uncertain, he said. I do not intend trying my fortune in the goldfields. Storekeeping is much surer way of game. We have done a very large trade in the wholesales since these new goldfields rushes opened. Now, one of the principal strands that is evident in the letters from Australia, from America, Canada, and so on, is the capacity of arriving immigrants to find work, and if their letters are to be believed, do well. In very general terms, as Rodney Green and Kirby Miller suggest, typically the 18th century and early 19th century Ulster immigrants' ambitions were on gaining land on the New World, and those of his later 19th century counterpart were focused on acquiring work in the cities. John Denison, for example, who had settled on a farm in Pennsylvania, wrote to his brother Samuel in Dromore, County Down, in 1789. I have given a small account of the country to you. If you were here, you might do well. And if you were here and settled nigh to me, I would not see you want until you would have time to fix yourself. John and Jane Chambers had emigrated from Mullaglass, parish of Ballymore, County Armagh, in the 1790s. In a letter home dated March 1796 from Freehold Township, Monmouth County, New Jersey, John gives an account of their progress on the acquisition of land. Honored mother, he said, since I came to this country, I had 2 children, both daughters. The oldest name is Betty, for my brother's wife. The other is now 2 weeks old, and my wife is now up and well. Her name is Jane. I now live within 37 miles of New York, near the shore, and has rented a house and place for 1 year. And after that time is expired, I intend to go a little further back to Albany, where the land is better and cheaper. I like this country, he affirms, very well, and everything seems to do very well with me. Whether on land or in a more urban, even industrial context, what echoes strongly through the immigrants' letters is a consistent emphasis on the freedom they have found, and perhaps just as striking, on the ability to take your labour wherever the opportunity presents itself, and to have obligations to no one except your family and yourself. This comes across clearly in James Ritchie's letter to a family near Lisburn, 1818, having emigrated to Philadelphia earlier in the century. He describes his encounter with a prospective employer. I went up to him with my cap in my hand, as humble as any Irishman, and asked him if he wanted a person of my description. Put on your hat, said he. We are a free people here. We all enjoy equal freedoms and privileges. He hesitated a little. I believe I do, he said. He asked me where I was from and how long since I had landed, and some other questions, before we closed our bargain. Joseph Anderson, writing 30 years later in 1840 from West Salem, Mercer County, Pennsylvania, and whose family had settled on farming land in the western Pennsylvania-Ohio border for close on a generation, assured people at home that, quotes, "I am arrived safe with my relations. A man, once he gets a start in this country, in the farming way, can get along pretty well. A good deal better than in Ireland. Once they get the deed of their land, they are safe. No rents at all. And every man here is lord of his soil." Later in 1853, Andrew Greenlees, writing from upstate New York to his family in Machermorne, County Antrim, proclaimed the advantages of the new labour market for immigrants with his ringing cry. "This," he said, "is a free country. Jack's as good as his master. If you don't like one, then go to another. Plenty of work and plenty of wages, plenty to eat, and no landlords. That's enough. What more does a man want?" he said. Above all, going back to Miller's title, Emigrants and Exiles, and the main theme to have to remember of Kirby's thesis is on seeing the Irish immigrants as exiles, and all the while bearing in mind the old adage that history, generally speaking, is written by the winners. There is rarely a sense of exile that can be detected in the letters home, and that whether it was forced or voluntary, migration to and resettlement in the New World can be seen to have been rewarded in the majority of cases by an independence and sense of freedom that they hadn't known in their own homeland. And the value of the collections of these letters is the construction of a narrative over years that confirms or otherwise their claims as to be doing well. Now, in this lecture, I've tried to focus on the influence that Brian Trainor had on my own professional development. I stopped short of calling it a career. His role in collecting and making available immigrants' letters, only one of a number of sources whose collection he championed. To reflect a slight interest, to reflect to a slight extent on the role that Family, this year celebrating, as you know, its 40th anniversary, has had in providing an outlet for research on the subject. And above all, to draw attention to the value of immigrants' letters as a generally reliable source for social historians and genealogists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trevor, for your talk, which skillfully brought together various themes close to Dad's heart, chief among them PRONI's remarkable collection of immigrant letters, unsurpassed by few institutions elsewhere in the world. Okay. Trevor did make mention of this book. This is Patrick O'Farrell's Letters from Irish Australia, 1825 to 1929. It was published, this is the first edition, published in 1984 by the New South Wales University Press and the Ulster Historical Foundation. Dad's name appears on the title page, for it was he who edited the text of the letters upon which this book is based. And this particular copy is dedicated to our mother by both Patrick and Dad. And if it catches your fancy, copies are available here later on. Okay, we move on now to hear from three individuals who together have supported Familia since its inception, either as authors, reviewers, or both. Our next contribution in the form of a recording comes from Brenda Collins. Brenda, who now lives in Scotland, has been a visiting research fellow at Queen's University Belfast since 2011. Prior to that, she was research officer at the Irish Linen Centre and the Lisburn Museum from 1993 to 2011.
Two organisations, the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland and the Ulster Historical Foundation, dominated Brian Trainor's working life. I'm conscious I've been involved in humble ways with both of them. I began visiting PRONI regularly in the 1970s when I was working as a historian on a research project on the 1901 census of Belfast. This had no genealogical connections, but inevitably I met a number of genealogists during my weekly visits. I became aware of how many people came from all over the world in search of their ancestral records. It also became clear that Brian Trainor's many trips across the Atlantic publicising the records and the facilities at PRONI were what encouraged so many to visit Northern Ireland. At that time, very few tourists considered coming here because of the Troubles. In PRONI, visitors met each other and discovered connections and mutual interests, and this was a great boost to their making further annual visits, perhaps bringing friends and family, and also discovering relatives in Ireland. All this, which is now taken for granted, would not have started without Brian Trainor's commitment. Trainor continued his North American tours into his 80s. His attitude towards outreach extended beyond face-to-face North American tours. In his early PRONI days, he backed the development of a series of publications which encouraged people to develop an interest in local history records. Apart from the school's education packs, which were pioneers of their type in providing facsimile documents on topics such as the Great Famine and the 1798 Rebellion, there were many other packs of documents on the growth of Belfast and on the linen industry. All of these encouraged more local visitors to explore PRONI's resources for themselves, and this helped put them into contact with research visitors from overseas. Over the years, many of these publications became out of print, but good local history libraries have copies, as can be seen by perusing the Linnenhall Library's catalogue. Brian Trainor was always keen to encourage new approaches to studying history, and this was seen in his backing of the online catalogue, which is one of the earliest online archives catalogues in the UK. And importantly, it was available on the PRONI website without the need for prior registration or payment. The catalogue has grown and grown, but those basic principles of access have remained, and they have enabled researchers from far afield to identify records that might be useful to see firsthand. PRONI's establishment of its online collaborative archive, which was set up during the COVID-19 epidemic for volunteers to transcribe emigrants' letters, is very much in the spirit of Trainor's interests. Trainor was aware of the source material available in the Public Record Office of Ireland in Dublin. Partition of Ireland into two different jurisdictions had ignored administrative or jurisdictional boundaries which had been used for hundreds of years. So there were historical records relating to areas in Northern Ireland which were close to the border that were located in the Public Record Office of Ireland in Dublin. Trainor pushed for government finance to enable copies of relevant material there to be made available at PRONI. In 1987, he took on directorship of the Ulster Historical Foundation, which became an independent genealogical and historical research and publication agency. The Foundation's annual publication, Familia, has gone from strength to strength. Under the editorship of Trevor Parkhill, who has edited Familia for the last 30 years, it has reached far beyond its original genealogical remit. Trevor's experience working under Trainor and then in the Ulster Museum has given him an unrivaled knowledge of local history source material. The contents list of the 2024 volume conveys the breadth of its interest, both in time and space. Records in PRONI of an account of the visit to the Giant's Causeway in 1787 precede the tale of an early 20th century migrant to Canada. The book reviews enable readers to catch up on publications which they may not have already come across, particularly if they live overseas. Familia has continued to provide a consistently high standard of access to some of the best writings on Irish social and genealogical history throughout its years of publication. It's been a pleasure to contribute to this day.
Well, thank you, Brenda. Hopefully you're in the ether listening to us. Okay, our penultimate contributor today is Dr. Paddy Fitzgerald, Head of Research and Development at the Mellon Centre for Migration Studies at the Ulster American Folk Park, OMA. Paddy is a good friend of the Ulster Historical Foundation of many years standing, and indeed both his father Stanley and his brother Rory have worked as genealogical researchers in the past. Thank you, Paddy.
It's a great honour, I have to say at the outset, to be invited to give a few thoughts and reminiscences as we gather together to both celebrate Familia and remember Brian Trainor. As I was coming up on the bus to say, I was also thinking personally that it's kind of another milestone on that transition from young Turk to old codger. But migrationists have to be stoical on such matters. I am aware that I'm towards the end in the batting order. And I was a bit worried that I wouldn't have anything original left to say. So I've chosen to take a path at the outset, which is around family history. Not the professional genealogy of the foundation, but my own family history, sort of given away there in the introduction. The more experienced, mature presences in the room may recall that my own father, Stanley Fitzgerald, was a school history inspector back in the 70s and 80s, and he would have had regular dealings with the man with the booming voice. And it is perhaps the voice in many ways which we remember most vividly. I have to tell you that another of the legends, Bill Crawford, came to dinner at 22 Victoria Street, Armagh, the family home, around Christmas 1970. And as a 6-year-old in his pajamas, I remember sitting on the stairs listening into the conversation. I was an extremely nosy child. I reckoned William Henry Crawford was indeed none other than Santa Claus. Okay, he didn't have the red coat with the white trimming, and he didn't have a white beard, but in every other respect, he was, he was Father Christmas. And I remember being deeply disheartened the next day to find that he hadn't actually left the Airfix pontoon bridge that so occupied my thoughts at that moment in history. My dad was also a member of the Brian Trainor cohort, the QUB class of 1949. Coming through World War II, they had to grow up fast, and they turned an annex room in the club bar into a post-lecture debating hothouse. That year produced no less than four first-class honours degrees. One of the others, I suspect, but I might be wrong here, was David Beers, the late David Beers Quinn, who had made his way, I found out later, from Newton Stewart in County Tyrone. Now, it's a truism to say that Ulster is a small place, but remarkably, Brian Trainor was also a childhood neighbour. We, the Fitzgeralds, were at 6 Dervolgy Avenue, and behind our garden and one up in Windsor Park, where it was the Trainor household. And I'm afraid I need to fess up and apologise. In the late 70s, when we should have been revising for exams, my brother and I were to be found in the garden playing badminton. In the intervals between these matches, we would pick up whizzing crab apples and fire them as high in the air as we possibly could, not thinking too much about where they might fall. So if any members of the Trainor family were ever hit by a stray Newtonian missile, or your greenhouse lost a pane, I take this opportunity to apologise. If I had known for 1 second that it would be Brian Trainor who would be ringing the Fitzgerald doorbell to complain, I definitely wouldn't have undertaken it. Okay, enough of the whimsy. Familia, the Ulster Genealogical Review, became the hub, indeed the beating heart, not just of family history, but simply Ulster history. And Trevor, from 1994, despite many other commitments, edited with great energy and skill. Familia to me was always reflected the open Ulster, never narrow, never partisan. It was one of 2 journals I always awaited with eager anticipation. Just for the record, the other was Irish Economic and Social History. Trevor never sent you an invite or commission to review. He sent his often extensive notes alongside. I can see him in the black chair on BBC with Ulster, nay, Irish historiography from 1960 as his special subject. The Francophile arguably came into his own in the late 1990s with the bicentenary of 1798, and the catalogue of the exhibit in the Ulster Museum up in Arms is a magnificent production publication and is something that I refer to on a monthly basis. From the get-go, Familia was a connection point with the diaspora. What Aikenson dubbed a diasporic sensibility was there from the beginning, and it is almost impossible to imagine the Federation without Familia. Returning to Brian Trainor, and I can't help but smile, but what we now know were dubbed the Coleraine Mafia. I love the thought of it. I can just see them in their white suits walking down the Coleraine main street. At the end of last week, I asked my old boss and colleague from the Mellon Centre, Brian Lampkin, for one word to describe Brian Trainor. And he obviously had remembered what Crawford had dubbed him, the bulldozer. And the bulldozer is apt in that it does express that huge energy and determination. But at the same time, it could be misread, and you wouldn't want it in any way to suggest that he was not a man with an incredible eye for detail, because he most certainly had that. Flicking through Trevor McLaughlin's wonderful book, Barefoot and Pregnant, on the Earl Grey famine orphans last week, I noticed in reading the acknowledgements, so it's always useful to read the acknowledgements, that he described Brian Trainor as a friend and paid full acknowledgement to him. And I reckon if you multiplied that by 10,000, you would be somewhere close to the truth. I reckon that over the years, he helped more people than the Citizens Advice Bureau and the Samaritans combined. Someone's already said it, but I'll repeat it. He was a man of incredible generosity. So really, I think, to wind up, there are three things that I would say about Brian Trainor. The first one is that he had very high personal standards, what in old money we might have called ethics. And I think the only possible downside of that is that you sometimes, people like that, have an expectation that every single person that they deal with will be exactly the same, and they can be disappointed. I can't forget, now that I mention it, myself and Brian Lampkin getting on the train at Portadown for Dublin one day, and we joined Brian at a table, and he was waxing lyrical about the IMC and his trip down to Dublin, and somebody said, bloody people down there, bloody gumbean men, bloody gumbean men. And it did leave a very strong impression. Hope nobody from the IMC or Dublin takes that in there. Second quality, he was blessed with an incredibly strong appreciation of what I would dub the common good. Brian was envisioning shared history long before that ever entered the lexicon. And finally, he had a very strong sense of what I would call public service. He wasn't working so hard for the money or to build an empire. I owe him a particular debt because he took his bulldozer, at least metaphorically, into so many solicitors' offices and gathered so many emigrant letters, of which we've just heard so much from Trevor. And I want to leave the last word to one of those correspondents. In July 1880, the California dreamer, John S. Sinclair, wrote home from a hot, sunny Sonoma County to his niece Margaret Graham in the townland of Tully Brick near Draperstown in South Derry. Inevitably, they were talking about the weather. Quote, "We had no rain since the 10th of May. I expect no rain till winter. I want to hear what kind of weather you have. If Tully Brick turf was here 2 days, they would be dry." It's just such a beautiful way of making that mental link 6,000 miles away and thinking of turf from the bog being in Sonoma. These voices have been captured for us, and we owe a huge debt that they have to people of the caliber of both Brian Trainor and Trevor Parkhill. And the only final thing I have to say is that Brian also was a sponsor of the Northern Ireland Place Names Project. And one of the threads running through what we've heard so far this morning was his delicious love of local place, the townland, the parish, the local. That was a real passion for Brian. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Paddy. That was lovely, and a few new wee stories there. Your point about Dad is very well made. I mean, we talk about him as an archivist and so on and so forth, but he was a civil servant. He was a public servant. And that was, he did really see himself very much, you know, in that role. That was, you know, only an aspect of him, but he did see himself as a public servant. Okay. Our final speaker today is Dr. Lindy Lunny. Dr. Lunny joined the newly founded Dictionary of the Irish Biography, or DIB, project as its very first staff member in 1983. Having previously been a junior research fellow at the Institute of Irish Studies at Queen's here in Belfast, Lindy retired from the DIB in 2018, by which time she had contributed almost 800 entries to that dictionary. Lindy.
Well, I am delighted to be contributing to the celebration of Familia's 40th birthday. I think I've been a subscriber since 2000, but if you pardon the pun, I have been familiar with Familia, the volumes of Familia, ever since the very first one, 40 years ago. They were all on the shelves in the library of the Royal Irish Academy, where I worked for most of my career. And they were indispensable to our work on researching and writing biographies. And even the covers of those very first early volumes are as familiar to me as the faces of my work colleagues from the 1980s and 1990s. And mention of faces allows me to launch a rather unlikely analogy for the role of Familia in Irish intellectual history. I will chance my arm and suggest that volumes of Familia, right from the start, are actually like a hard copy version of Facebook, and that the founders of this local history journal in 1985, Brian Trainor especially, should be credited in intellectual historical terms with inventing the social media algorithm on which Facebook has made huge fortunes. From 2007, Facebook uses algorithms to deliver ever more personalized posts on the internet forum, which are designed to appeal ever more accurately and addictively to its customers. But when Zuckerberg was in nappies, Brian Trainor and his colleagues in local history and in archives already they were providing articles and content which are so exactly appropriate to the target audience. The algorithm, the choice of articles in any issue of Familia is so effective for people interested in local history and family history. It's hard to imagine anything that I'd rather read than articles about war commemoration in Ballymoney, or James Brown armour, also of Ballymoney. Burial customs and wills. Yes, definitely, I'd enjoy that. Manorial courts of the Earls of Antrim. Could you get anything better? Even articles that don't revolve around Ballymoney or Coleraine almost always teach something or suggest connections or provide new sources, especially the review articles revealing wide-ranging scholarship and the book reviews which suggest further reading on so many topics and which very often allow you to feel that you have read the books without taking the trouble to do so. There are other ways that I can make the argument that Familia is actually a Facebook for the local historian. Although, of course, Familia is much more intellectually satisfying than Facebook. Posts on Facebook, for instance, allow you to keep in touch to some extent with what is happening to long-lost friends from school or college, or with the children of your cousins that you might otherwise not know at all. Familia produces similar feelings of participating in other people's lives. In the case of Familia, the lives that we can feel that we are part of are those of the long dead neighbours of your ancestors. As very often in local articles about local history, you can find traces of people that your ancestors would have known. Long lost cousins and their daughters. But also, and this is very germane to this talk today, as we all gather to commemorate and celebrate Brian Trainor and the other pioneers of the Facebook algorithm, Familia over the years has generated a present-day community of scholars and historians and local people who are interested in history. And that community is very evident as I look round the room today. By now, over the years, I have been in contact with so many fellow contributors of Familia, in real life or via their work. I turn enthusiastically to read the potted biographies of fellow contributors, and I wonder, perhaps, if the editor would consider having little photos of the authors to let me see how people are aging. As Facebook knows, people like pictures of actual faces. You might suggest that Familia is less salacious and less exciting than your average Facebook feed. But when you have articles on the Newton Stewart murder of 1871, or on Dean Muhammad, curry entrepreneur and shampooer to kings, who needs videos of cats falling off balconies or bears getting into parked cars? I don't want to stretch these parallels too far in case I exhaust your patience or exasperate those who disapprove of social media. Of course, Familia has many important advantages over Facebook. Facebook is the opposite of local. As Paddy pointed out, and as Brian Trainor so eloquently reminds us in this year's issue of Familia, the local underlies and supports everything in history and society. I have no patience with historians who believe that they should do the wide sweep with a wide brush. That's not history, as I think Brian Trainor would recognize. The volumes of Familia have permanent utility and lifelong interest, unlike Facebook. They can be read and reread with intellectual enjoyment every time, again, unlike Facebook. I would urge everyone to reread back issues. Just skimming through my copies to prepare this talk, I noticed dozens of bits of information that I had forgotten, or that have perhaps more accurately come to have more relevance to my historical interests as those have developed over the 40 years of Familia. I am always amazed by the connections that I can make within the articles and to my own interests. Familia provides many instances of the 6 degrees of separation, which is such a feature of Irish life and Irish history. I must not finish without remembering Brian Trainor and his embrace of a new novice historian when Bill Crawford introduced me in the Public Record Office a very long time ago, but it was completely encouraging and enthusiastic. But I also must refer to the editor for so many years, my almost contemporary. I think we have finally decided that Trevor and I are almost contemporaries. Trevor's frontispieces are 50 times better than the best artificial intelligence overviews that we are now all getting on Google searches. You get a wee paragraph at the top, the AI overview. Trevor's frontispieces to his volumes of Familia are much more erudite, providing a flavour of the whole volume in a miraculous, succinct, and typically Parkhillian manner. Sometimes elegiac, always magisterial and celebratory, and they never destroy the illusion that the work of the editor is anything other than enjoyable. Congratulations to Familia, to Trevor Parkhill, and a thank you to all those who have taught us so much about Ulster's past and whose work shines so much light on our community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindy. Okay, well, we are drawing to the end of our gathering. So I would like to conclude this Brian Trainor Memorial Lecture with some thank yous. First of all, a big thank you to the Ulster Historical Foundation, Fintan, William, and all the staff whose hard work made this event possible. I also appreciate the help that you gave me in preparing my own role here today. A big thank you to the PRONI team and Stephen Scarth in particular for hosting today's memorial lecture. Events such as this one help to keep that lively connection between the two organisations in good shape and remind us that once upon a time, both organisations shared a physical home and management team. To all our speakers and contributors this morning, William, Trevor, Paddy, Lindy, and Brenda, all friends and collaborators of DADS, thank you all very much indeed for your participation today. Thank you also to those of you who have supported this memorial event with your donations. Hopefully we may get to repeat it sometime in the future. And finally, thank you to all of you for being present today, both in person and remotely, particularly my own family who have turned out to support me and this event in Dad's memory. I know, we know, he would be very gratified and touched. I'm very grateful to you all. I hope you've enjoyed listening to our great speakers. Lunch will be coming up shortly. We're a little bit ahead of time, but we will have a bit of time to chat and catch up. Thank you all.
Okay, folks, just before we break for lunch, we want to just add a few more thanks. My name is Fintan Mullen. I'm the director of the foundation, by the way. We'd like to thank everybody who's tuned in remotely to hear the presentations this morning. We'd like to thank you especially for coming here today. We'd like to also echo Rosana's words in thanking PRONI for being so willing to host the event. So we want to do a little thank you to some of those involved in today, and we'd like to start with the main speaker, Trevor himself. Trevor, we have for you and a couple of others this little poster for you with all 40 covers of Familia. And when you look at the, in nearly all cases, it was Trevor's idea that then Wendy executed. So it represents, I suppose, your creativity in presenting Familia with a new look each year. So, Trevor, if you'd like to come up, I've got one for you here, and also reference to the Francophobia or Francophilia, sorry, I should say. Little bottle. More important. And we'll talk about that. So we'd like to thank you for taking part today and delivering such a wonderful presentation. We'd also like to give a copy of this to the Trainor family. You can fight over that. And we have one for Wendy Dunbar, if she's in the room. Wendy here? No? Okay, well, and we don't want to forget our other speakers today, although we probably will forget our research director. So I would like to, Gillian, to give out a little thank you to Lindy and to Paddy. We've one going in the post to Brenda, and I think that's about it. Rosana, sorry, excuse me, I beg your pardon. Thank you, Rosana, for overseeing the whole event so well today. So, folks, that's all I've got to say. We are a little ahead of time, so lunch will be just about coming out now, so you can mingle, use the facilities, and then food will be served out in the foyer here, okay? Books, yes, Will is reminding me, there's a book table out there as well, so buy early and buy often.